Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our next Nugget session that will be led by Christopher Craig, who recently joined Netrio as the Director of Business Development. So in today's session led by Chris, he'll be covering business development and product strategy and how to leverage strategy to unlock business growth. So Chris, all systems are go.
Hello all, and welcome to Nugget 2021. My name is Chris Craig, and I'm a Global Business Development Director with Netrio. In fact, today is my first day with the team, so I'm especially excited to have the opportunity to give you a presentation on my first day. Today, the topic I'm going to be presenting on is business development and product innovation. But before I dive into the presentation, a quick background about myself. So, as I mentioned, I'm a Global Business Development Director with Netrio. What my focus is going to be on is growing our channel partnerships in Europe and leading the Global Business Development Organization. A little bit about me is I went to Indiana University for my undergrad, and I got my MBA from the University of St. Gallen, which is a school just outside of Zurich. I first got into IT after joining PwC and moving to Silicon Valley, where I lived for the past 7 years before moving to Europe. For half of the time that I was in Silicon Valley, I was at Uber for over 3 years on a global business operations team that was focused on driving customer support excellence across all of our regional support sites and trying to define the right products to offer to our driver base for the Uber drivers. And then as I mentioned, I'm now living in Switzerland, but I grew up in the US, in Michigan. And then lastly, I raced on a US-based professional cycling team, but since moving to Europe, I've now, quote, retired. And then lastly, as I also mentioned, today is my first day with Netrio. Very excited to be joining the team. So diving into the presentation. So taking a step back, what is business development? Well, when you see this definition that I was able to pull from the internet, it can mean a lot of different things and also contains a lot of different buzzwords. At the areas that are bold, you can see some of the main themes, and these are the themes that will be driving throughout the rest of the presentation. Business development really means different things across different businesses or even industries. Sometimes a business development role can be a classic sales role. Other times it's more of a marketing function where you're signing commercial rights sponsorships, for instance. It can mean many different things by the business, and that's really okay. What it's about is just knowing the main principles that lead to success for business development and then acting on those. So looking at the ones in bold, it's all about identifying strategic opportunities. This could apply to any context. What is the right new revenue stream to go after? What's the best geo? And then how do you do it? Should you cultivate a partnership, focus on commercial relationships, or simply should you just go and launch a new product in a new market? It can be many of these things, and it really depends on the context of the business situation that you're in. But as I already mentioned, there's principles that you can pull out of this definition that can feed into how a person should act in a business development role. So that brings me on to the next slide. What are those key principles? Some of them I already brought up, but we'll provide a bit more context on them now. One could be through trying to form new partnerships. So in the context of this, think about, for instance, signing a deal, a new channel partnership to expand into a new geo to help sell more. Or for instance, you could even do a commercial rights sponsorship or an actual partnership deal where from a marketing perspective, you're able to show that you're both partners and support each other. Another principle is going and launching into new markets. This is essentially where you would decide that based on your business strategy, that it's the right approach to go into a new market and offer the product that's already existing. Additional approach here is that you could actually sell more of the product that you already have in that market itself. And then lastly, you could simply offer a new product or a new service, which isn't necessarily an add-on to an existing product. So these are all examples, again, which are pretty high level. One that I will give is from the Uber context. So Uber had the Uber Rides business, as many people know, which is essentially the taxi business for Uber. And what Uber decided to do was to try to leverage the driver network to be able to offer new products and services. So they decided to launch Uber Eats, which is highly used today, and due to COVID is actually has been over the past few quarters a larger business than the rides business. This is a perfect example of a business development activity where in this case, not necessarily a new market because Uber was already global by this point, but a new product was decided to be launched in markets that were already existing. So I'm actually going to give some even more use cases because I really think that provides some good flavor onto the different principles and the overall strategies that companies go through, which is on the next slide. So many people know these brands. Actually, I'd bet that pretty much everyone knows these brands. So I'm going to give 3 quick stories for each one of these and how business development was a part of their overall success and the massive growth that they've all had. So starting with Apple on the left. Back before the iPhone existed, which many of us can't even remember, I was frankly quite young then, Apple was primarily a PC business. And then through sort of business discussions, which were happening on an internal basis, they decided to try to expand into the iPhone business. Now today, the iPhone accounts for 50% of all the revenue for Apple. It's a very high number. This is a classic example of identifying the market environment in the PC market for Apple's context, and then deciding to innovate on a new product or service. And then in that existing customer base, going out and launching a new product. And in this case, it was the iPhone, which has been a massive success for Apple. Another example I'll give is Salesforce. Salesforce has become really well known for how strong their channel and their channel and partner network is. Essentially, Salesforce is the company itself, but on top of that, a addition of thousands and thousands of highly skilled, essentially engineers who can integrate their product into different services. When we were at Uber, when I was at Uber, for instance, Salesforce was actually brought in to help develop some of our knowledge bases for customer support. And there was a team of experts from one of the big 4 consulting firms who came in to launch it. Salesforce didn't have to have full-time headcount that was on site doing that specific integration. That's a great extent. That's a really good example of developing a partnership network where you're able to extend your sales focus way beyond your full-time headcount and have a massive exposure. So for very little effort from Salesforce, once the product was up and running, they were able to then sell to a big company like Uber and many, many more through trying to partner with, in this case, a big 4 consulting partner. And then lastly, this is an example that people might not have heard of as much, but one that I find pretty fun. So I love drinking coffee, and the capsules from Nestle, Nespresso, essentially these capsules were under a patent for a really long time. And then after 10 years or so, the patent actually ended up going away. Generic brands were able to come in and develop their own capsules. And the team actually knew this at the time, that eventually they would lose their competitive advantage of having the only capsules that they were able to make. And what they decided to do was try to engineer the capsule in such a way that's really hard to copy. And that's actually that little lip there that you can see on the slide. So essentially, Nestle created in this way, so when the generic brands came in and tried to make a cheaper product, it might not be as effective for the customer. And then the customer decided to go back to the higher quality product, which is theirs. So, and then on top of that, there's even another example here, is that essentially Nespresso, you can buy the machine itself, but then you can buy the capsules, which are way more expensive over time. right? They'll end up making more money. And that's a classic business strategy where essentially from a business development context, they've decided to add on offers onto additional revenue stream, which is the machine itself, and create this capsule business, but then also create barriers to entry through creating a capsule product, which is hard to copy from the generic brands, and then might not lead to the best customer experience, which may lead to not the best customer experience. So then a customer will then decide to go back to the main brand. So these are 3 specific use cases on the principles of business development and how other businesses out there are launching programs like this today. So moving on a little bit. So there's a photo here which shows 2 different types of ways to build product and attract customers. On the left side, this is more of the classic sales cycle where you have a really great product, you're able to attract people, engage them, and then convert them into customers. We all know that very well. Then on the right-hand side, there's also the flywheel concept, which many people have heard about. This is really where SaaS is really all about, right? So you get a customer and you continually offer them really good products and services and add-on offers on top of the product. So it's truly customer obsession based. So it's a flywheel of offers. So they continue to remain engaged with the product. And the second that flywheel stops, there's risk of them churning. So it's important to continually ask what the actual customer wants, meet with them, talk with them, and add on offers as time goes on. And then what really makes these 2 different is essentially from the business development context. One is more about a actual linear growth model, and one can be more exponential. So the left-hand side is more of a linear concept. You have a product which is set, and it's improved over time, and you run through a cycle of engagement and selling. And then on the right-hand side, essentially it can become exponential, where customers can end up referring your product to other users and expand it even more on essentially on an exponential basis. The quote that always really sticks with me on this one was from the Airbnb co-founder, Brian, where he stated that 100 customers that love you are way better than 1,000 that just like you. And that's really what this is all about. Product innovation is about really knowing what the customer wants, listening to them, building that product for them, and then trying to continually offer them add-on value as time goes on. So that kind of goes into the next slide. So what should a business developer know? Well, business development is all about high-level decision making. So it's really important to remain informed on the business context, on the market. So business school concepts like running a SWOT analysis to know what your market environment is, knowing the current state of the industry, competitor developments. I won't go through the whole list and read all of these, but these are the main principles in terms of the areas that a business developer should really focus on so they can remain highly relevant in the industry that they work in. For me, in the context when I said Uber, it was really important for me to know what was going on with our key competitors like Lyft. They were constantly offering new products and services. So then we would then connect with our driver base. I would actually go out and specifically meet with drivers and run actual focus groups and speak with them and connect with them and try to figure out how we can offer differentiated products into addition what Lyft was. So specific context of that could be safety features for drivers, enhanced routing, better pricing, and things like that. So now that we've talked about mainly what the opportunities are, we're going to focus a little bit on the risks. So being in business development and also in product innovation, one of the risks is that things are always changing, right? And the issue with that is you have to constantly keep up. And the risk is if you slow down, then you're going to get behind. So it's very important that you have the right framework in place in terms of knowledge base or a specific way to research to be able to quickly make sure that you're up to speed on what's going on in the market. And then of course, any new entrants who enter the market, that's a high risk, especially in a market where products have perhaps been commoditized. Uber would be an example of that, where the barriers to entry are really low and it's easy for competitors to enter. Complacency. This is on the flip side. Complacency can actually come from really having high barriers to entry. There's many more archaic, I won't give specific examples, but more archaic businesses that are in such a strong competitive position, or they just become so big as a massive conglomerate that they might become a little bit complacent. And in the short term, that's okay. But in the long term, it can become a huge issue because of essentially disruptive innovation, where a new entrant can come and offer a much more customer-centric product, and then they can start to take market share. I'll actually discuss about that a little bit more in the next slide. Another example is the changing legal landscape. So this is like in context of a non-market factor. So maybe a specific regulation changes. Nespresso is a great example of this with their patent. So when that expired, then their barriers to entry went down significantly, which then caused their product not to be as innovative. And that goes to my next point: technology advancements themselves. Looking at the Apple example I gave, the iPhone has to constantly improve itself each time it releases, or they're going to lose market share. And you can notice that when each iPhone's released, the improvements become smaller between each product. This is eventually going to catch up to them because there's going to be new entrants essentially who can offer way more differentiated products, and then that could be essentially a disruptive threat. And then lastly, simply staying relevant. This would apply to SMBs, where in the world of social media, LinkedIn, really strong social media marketing tools, that there's a constant fight to remain known in the marketplace that you actually operate in. So as I mentioned, I was going to talk a little bit more about disruptive innovation, and that crosses into this slide here, which is from resource from a great book that I read called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey A. Moore. So the chasm is in the middle of the slide there, where you have to transition from early market to mainstream market. Early market are the people who want the newest things. So the classic example is the plasma screen TV before the plasma screen was really a thing. People would buy it and it'd be extremely expensive, but they just want that newest product. And then eventually, as we know, these plasma screens is also flat, more like actual flat screen TVs now. We're able to cross this chasm, and now almost all of us have a TV like this now. Even I'd say the majority of the laggards do, right? So this is an example of a new product that was developed and was able to go from early market into mainstream market. And Uber is actually a really good example of this as well. So Uber started with a very small focused group, which was US cities, college students, and trying to launch a region by region and giving GMs in each city their all the resources that they needed to be able to expand that base and develop a really strong core market of innovators and also early adopters who would then refer other people to then cross that chasm. Major cities like Chicago, New York City, LA, for instance, all of these were the initial markets that Uber launched in, where they developed really strong core customer bases and then used that to expand into the mainstream. So That is an example of crossing the chasm, which goes into my bullets. You need to focus on becoming the big fish in a small pond. In the Uber context, it was trying to tackle city by city and trying to disrupt the taxi market. They were able to do this by being really focused on one market and trying to expand it with core adopters who were on the earlier side, who wanted to become members of the platform. The ways that they were able to pull them in, they could be exclusive revenue essentially for drivers. The revenue opportunity is really high. And then the second bullet here is you need to rapidly enter the market. So giving the example of Uber again, Uber didn't wait for the product to be perfect. When it first launched in some of the first cities in the US, some of the features didn't even work, to be honest. Sometimes drivers didn't show up. There was issues. Customer support was really a challenge. But what the decision that was made then was to expand really fast, get people stuck, and create a sticky product that people want to use, and really focus it. And really, really fast was important. And then once you have the customer, offering additional products and services so that they're satisfied with the product, and then quickly fixing any of the issues too. Because again, this isn't about trying to trick the customer or anything. It's about trying to figure out what they really, really want and trying to solve something that is currently of issue today, which in that case with the taxi market at the time, which was extremely like decades behind in terms of the way that they were doing business. Uber was a whole new approach to that. So maybe it wasn't perfect, but the customer session really was still there and focusing on really what the user needs and wants. And then lastly, the point here is customers change over the lifetime of product. Back to let's use the iPhone as the example. Early adopters, smartphone users, these were only the people that perhaps were like really focused on the tech side. I mean, at this point in time, there wasn't the App Store, for instance. And now the customer is pretty much anybody. It could be even like a teenager, of course. Like, so basically you need to create really simple products that people are able to use and understand for the iPhone, and the apps on top of it. So that's an example of how the product has changed over time. So my last slide is what the future of business development and product innovation is. So the first bullet here is essentially geographies are become more similar and easier for corporations to enter. We're moving into a world of more global standardization. Despite COVID, our world is becoming closer and closer together, and it's going to be easier for companies to enter new markets with their products. The second bullet is businesses on a similar note to the first one. Based off of that globalization, businesses really need to focus their products in more competitive and global marketplace. They need to be focused on what the customer needs to the core. Really, really focus, because when the whole world is becoming the playing field in terms of the competition, it becomes highly competitive, and you have to find ways to differentiate. The third bullet, customer session will become a key requirement for business success. This goes beyond just tech. Customer session needs to be the core of every business and what they do, and people need to fully listen to what the customer needs and wants, because again, as the market becomes more and more competitive, differentiation can really come from a company that truly shows that they're obsessed about the customer and the needs and desires that they have. The fourth bullet is product differentiation, as I mentioned a few times already, will be of really high importance, because again, as I've said a few times now, as the market starts to globalize, you need to be differentiated. But this needs to be attached to the customer session through creating value. This can be through developing products, launching focus groups, listening to them, listening to the customer, and then adding add-on features as time goes on. Lastly, channel sales and also partnership models will become a critical selling function of any successful everything as a service business. Being that the world is transitioning to a global marketplace, it's very important that tech companies focus on the way that they can maximize their TAM, essentially, trying to maximize their reach of different customers and users. And a great method to do that is by trying to leverage a partner or trying to enter a market through a channel. So these are some specific examples of how a tech company, like when they're competing on that global scale, has to think about expanding partnerships and also channel. The video got cut off, but thanks for attending my presentation today. If you'd like to reach out to discuss about the presentation or about Netreo more broadly, my contact details in the upper left-hand corner. Thanks again for attending and hope to hear from you soon. Bye.